In the hushed chambers of time, where memory itself becomes dust and legend takes root in the fertile soil of human wonder, there existed a civilization that gazed upon the vast desert sands and saw infinity staring back. Ancient Egypt, that golden thread woven through the tapestry of human history, understood something profound about the nature of existence. That from the deepest darkness, light emerges, and from the most complete silence, the first word of creation echoes across eternity. Long before the great pyramids cast their geometric shadows across the Giza plateau, before the sacred scribes traced hieroglyphs onto papyrus with reverent hands, there was nothing. Not the comfortable emptiness of a vacant room, or the peaceful quiet of a sleeping village, but the absolute void that exists before existence itself draws its first breath. The ancient Egyptians called this primordial state Nun, the infinite ocean of nothingness that stretched beyond comprehension, holding within its dark waters the seeds of everything that would ever be. Within this boundless sea of potential, something stirred. Not movement as mortals understand it, for there was neither space nor time to define such concepts, but rather the first tremor of consciousness awakening to itself. From the depths of Nun rose Atom, the self-created one, emerging not through birth, but through the sheer force of will made manifest. Atom was both the first thought and the thinker of that thought, the initial spark that would ignite the cosmic fires of creation. Picture, if such visualization were possible in that realm before sight existed, a being of pure intention materializing from the endless waters of chaos. Atom stood alone upon the primordial mound, Ben, which had risen from the depths like the first island of stability in an ocean of uncertainty. This sacred hill would later inspire the shape of pyramids, those stone mountains reaching toward the heavens, but in that moment of first becoming, it was simply the stage upon which the greatest drama in existence would unfold. The loneliness of Atom was not the melancholy solitude known to mortal hearts, but rather the profound isolation of being the only conscious entity in all of reality. From this cosmic solitude came the divine imperative to create, to breathe life into the void, to transform the endless potential of Nun into the manifold wonders of existence. Through an act of divine masturbation, Atom brought forth the first divine couple, spitting out Shu, the god of air and atmosphere, and vomiting forth Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and rain. These first acts of creation were not crude or base, but rather sacred mysteries that the ancient Egyptians understood as the fundamental forces of differentiation. Where once there had been only unity in nothingness, now there emerged the essential dualities that would define existence, male and female, dry and wet, space and substance. Shu and Tefnut danced together in the cosmic void, their union giving birth to the physical framework upon which all future creation would rest. The children of air and moisture became the parents of the earth and sky, for from their divine embrace emerged Geb, the earth god, whose body formed the solid foundation of the world, and Nut, the sky goddess, whose star-spangled form arched over creation like a protective canopy. The ancient texts describe how Nut's body stretched across the heavens, her fingers and toes touching the horizon at the 4 cardinal points, while beneath her Geb lay prone, his features forming the hills and valleys, the fertile banks of the Nile, and the vast expanses of desert that would cradle Egyptian civilization. Between earth and sky, Shu stood with arms raised, forever holding apart his children in an eternal act of cosmic balance. This separation was necessary, the ancient wisdom taught, for without the space between heaven and earth, there could be no room for life to flourish. In this divine arrangement, the Egyptians saw the fundamental architecture of existence itself, the interplay of opposing forces held in perfect tension, creating the stage upon which the drama of mortal and divine life would play out across millennia. But the cosmic family was not yet complete, for from the union of Geb and Nut came 4 children who would profoundly shape the Egyptian understanding of life, death, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Osiris emerged as the god of the underworld and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, his green skin symbolizing the fertile renewal that comes after apparent endings. Isis, the great mother goddess, embodied the protective feminine principle, her wings spread wide to shelter the vulnerable, and her magic capable of breathing life into death itself. Set, the red god of the desert, chaos, and storms, represented the necessary but dangerous forces of disruption and change that prevent existence from becoming stagnant. His brother Osiris is opposite in temperament and domain. Set was the wild wind that scours the desert, the sudden flood that reshapes riverbanks, the lightning that splits the night sky with fierce illumination. Nephthys, the final child, became the goddess of mourning and transition, standing at the liminal spaces where life meets death, where the known world borders the mysterious realm beyond. These 9 deities, Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys, formed what the ancient Egyptians called the Ennead of Heliopolis, the first and most fundamental pantheon of gods. Their emergence from primordial chaos represented the triumph of Maat, the cosmic principle of truth, justice, and divine order that would become the moral and spiritual foundation of Egyptian civilization. Each deity embodied essential aspects of existence, from the physical elements to the abstract concepts that govern both mortal life and divine action. The creation of divine order from primordial chaos was not a single moment of dramatic transformation, but rather an ongoing process of gradual emergence and careful balance. The ancient Egyptians understood that chaos, represented by the primordial waters of Nun, never truly disappeared, but remained as a constant presence at the edges of ordered existence. Every sunrise was a daily victory of the sun god Ra over the forces of darkness, every successful harvest a triumph of fertility over barrenness, every act of justice a reinforcement of Ma'at against the ever-present threat of cosmic dissolution. In the temples that would rise along the Nile, priests would daily perform rituals that reenacted these primordial moments of creation, understanding that their ceremonies were not mere commemorations, but active participations in the ongoing work of maintaining cosmic order. The burning of incense became an echo of the first breath of air, the pouring of libations a reflection of the primordial waters, the chanting of hymns a continuation of the divine words that first spoke existence into being. This understanding of creation as an ongoing process rather than a completed act would profoundly influence Egyptian attitudes toward life, death, and the afterlife. If the gods themselves had emerged from chaos through will and intention, then mortal souls too could navigate the chaotic waters of death and emerge transformed in the eternal realm beyond. The creation myths were thus not merely stories about the distant past, but templates for personal transformation and cosmic participation that every Egyptian soul could aspire to experience. From the primordial waters and the first stirrings of divine consciousness, there emerged a being whose very essence would become synonymous with life itself. Ra, the great solar deity, rose from the cosmic darkness like a golden flame piercing the endless night, his radiance spreading across the newly formed heavens with the slow, inevitable power of dawn breaking over an infinite ocean. His emergence marked not merely the creation of light, but the establishment of time itself, for with Ra's first movement across the celestial dome came the rhythm that would govern all existence. The eternal dance of day and night, of birth and renewal, of the endless cycling of the seasons through the fertile Nile Valley. The ancient Egyptians understood Ra's journey not as a simple passage of the sun across the sky, but as an epic voyage through realms both visible and hidden, a cosmic drama that played out each day above their heads while they tended their fields and conducted their earthly affairs. Ra's solar bark, a magnificent vessel wrought from materials that existed only in the realm of the gods, glided through the heavens on waters that reflected not earthly rivers, but the very essence of creation itself. This celestial river, invisible to mortal eyes, yet more real than the Nile that sustained their civilization, carried Ra from the eastern horizon, where he emerged each dawn in all his youthful glory, to the western edge of the world, where he would descend into the mysterious realm of the Duat, the underworld that lay beneath the earth and beyond the reach of living souls. The solar bark itself was a marvel that embodied the sophisticated cosmological understanding of the Egyptian priesthood. Its prow cut through the waters of the sky with the same purposeful motion that earthly boats navigated the Nile, yet this vessel carried within it the concentrated power of the universe itself. Ra stood at its center, his falcon head crowned with the sun disk that blazed with the intensity of 1,000 fires, his human torso bearing the regalia of divine kingship that linked him to every pharaoh who would ever rule the two lands. Around him gathered a retinue of deities whose presence was essential for the successful completion of his daily voyage. Sia representing divine knowledge, Hu embodying the power of divine speech, and Heka carrying the primordial magic that made all transformations possible. As Ra's bark traversed the daylight hours, his radiance brought life and warmth to the world below. The gentle lowing of cattle in emerald pastures, the rustling of papyrus in the river marshes, the busy chatter of workers in the fields, all of these sounds of earthly life rose like incense toward the solar deity as he passed overhead. The ancient texts speak of how Ra's light penetrated into every corner of creation, awakening not only plants and animals, but also the Ka, the vital essence that animated all living things. His warmth coaxed the lotus blossoms to unfold on the surface of temple pools, encouraged the grain to ripen in carefully tended plots along the riverbank, and stirred the sacred animals in their temple sanctuaries to lift their heads in acknowledgement of the divine presence that sustained their existence. Yet for all the beauty and tranquility of Ra's daytime journey, the ancient Egyptians knew that his most perilous and crucial work began when the solar bark reached the western horizon and prepared to descend into the underworld. Here, at the boundary between the land of the living and the realm of the dead, Ra underwent the first of many transformations that would carry him through the night hours. No longer the vigorous deity of midday with his blazing solar crown, he became Atum-Ra, an aged god whose strength seemed diminished, but whose wisdom had deepened through countless cycles of death and rebirth. The descent into the Duat marked the beginning of the cosmic battle that would rage throughout the night hours, a conflict so fundamental to Egyptian mythology that its outcome determined whether the sun would rise again the following dawn. The underworld through which Ra travelled was not merely a place of darkness, but a realm populated by demons, serpents, and hostile forces that sought to prevent the solar deity from completing his journey. These were not random obstacles, but manifestations of Isfet, the principle of chaos and disorder that stood in eternal opposition to Ma'at, the divine order that Ra represented and maintained through his daily voyage. At the heart of this cosmic conflict lay Apep, also known as Apophis, a serpent of such immense size and malevolent power that his very existence posed a threat to the continuation of creation itself. Apep dwelt in the deepest regions of the underworld, coiled in the primordial waters that existed before the birth of the gods, his massive form stretching across the path that Ra's bark must travel. Unlike other mythological serpents that might be defeated once and for all, Apep possessed the terrifying quality of regeneration. Each night, he would rise again to challenge Ra's passage. Each night, the battle would be fought anew, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. The confrontation between Ra and Apep represented more than a simple conflict between good and evil. In the sophisticated theological understanding of the Egyptian priests, this nightly battle embodied the fundamental tension between order and chaos that lay at the heart of existence itself. Apep was not evil in the human sense. He was chaos personified, the raw, destructive force that sought to return all creation to the undifferentiated darkness from which it had emerged. His attacks on Ra's solar bark were attempts to unravel the very fabric of reality, to dissolve the boundaries between day and night, life and death, the ordered world of human civilization, and the primordial void that preceded all creation. The battle itself unfolded in stages throughout the night hours, with each hour of darkness presenting new challenges and dangers. Ancient texts describe how Apep would launch himself at the solar bark with the force of a cosmic storm, his jaws gaping wide enough to swallow the sun itself. The serpent's breath could extinguish stars, his movements could shake the pillars that supported the heavens, and his roar could shatter the bonds that held the ordered world together. Yet Ra did not face this terrible adversary alone, for the solar bark carried within it the combined power of the divine realm. Set, the god of storms and warfare, stood at the prow of the vessel, wielding weapons forged from meteoric iron and lightning itself. His battle cry echoed through the underworld as he drove his spear again and again into Apep's massive coils, each strike accompanied by flashes of celestial fire that illuminated the dark waters of the Duat. Beside him fought other protective deities whose names were spoken in whispered prayers by priests maintaining their vigil through the night hours, their combined efforts creating a barrier of divine force around Ra's vulnerable form as he underwent the transformations necessary for his eventual rebirth. The struggle was never certain in its outcome, despite its nightly repetition. Egyptian texts emphasize that each battle required the full commitment of divine power, that Apep's defeat was never guaranteed but had to be achieved through constant vigilance and effort. This uncertainty was not a flaw in the cosmic order, but an essential aspect of it, for the possibility of chaos always remained real and present. The daily rising of the sun represented not an automatic process, but a victory that had to be won anew each night, a triumph of order over disorder that required the active participation of both gods and humans in maintaining the stability of creation. As the night hours progressed and the battle raged in the hidden depths of the underworld, Ra himself underwent a profound transformation. The aged Atum-Ra of sunset gradually shed his mortal-seeming form and entered into a mystical union with Osiris, the lord of the dead and ruler of the underworld. This merger represented one of the most profound mysteries of Egyptian religion, the joining of the solar principle of life and renewal with the chthonic power of death and regeneration. In this combined form, Ra Osiris possessed the authority to judge the dead and the power to grant them new life, his presence bringing light and hope even to the darkest regions of the afterlife. Through the deepest hours of the night, as the battle with Apep reached its climax and the forces of chaos pressed their attack with desperate fury, Ra continued his journey through the underworld's many chambers and corridors. Each region presented its own challenges and revelations, its own opportunities for the solar deity to demonstrate his mastery over death and darkness. In the Hall of Two Truths, he witnessed the weighing of hearts against the feather of Ma'at, observing as the souls of the deceased faced their final judgment. In the Lake of Fire, he sailed through waters that burned without consuming, their flames purifying rather than destroying all that passed through them. As Ra's golden bark disappears beyond the western horizon each evening, completing another cycle in the eternal dance of light and shadow, the ancient sands whisper of another divine drama that shaped the very foundations of Egyptian civilization. In the realm where gods walk among mortals and divine blood flows through royal veins, no tale carries greater significance than that of the sacred family, whose names echo through millennia like incantations carved in stone. Osiris, the green-skinned lord of the underworld, stands at the center of this celestial narrative, his very being embodying the promise of death transformed into eternal life. The fertile black soil of the Nile Delta holds within its depths the memory of Osiris in his earthly form, when he walked as the first great king of Egypt, bringing the gifts of civilization to a land still wild with possibility. His reign was golden, marked by wisdom that flowed like the river itself, teaching his people the sacred arts of agriculture, the brewing of beer, and the baking of bread. The papyrus scrolls speak of how he gave laws that were as enduring as the pyramids themselves, establishing order where chaos had once reigned supreme. Under his benevolent rule, the two lands flourished like gardens after the flood, and peace settled over Egypt like the gentle mist that rises from the Nile at dawn. Yet, in this paradise dwelt a shadow, for Set, brother to Osiris, burned with jealousy as consuming as the desert winds. The red god of chaos and storms harbored in his heart a darkness deeper than the caverns beneath the earth, watching with eyes that gleamed like obsidian as his brother's glory grew ever brighter. Set's envy festered like a wound that never heals, fed by whispers of courtiers and the constant reminder of his own lesser position in the cosmic order. The ancient texts describe how he plotted in silence, his mind working like a serpent preparing to strike, weaving plans as intricate as the finest linens produced by royal weavers. The moment of betrayal came with the elegance of a cobra's dance, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Set commissioned a sarcophagus of extraordinary beauty, crafted from the finest cedar and decorated with gold, that captured the light like trapped sunbeams. At a great feast where wine flowed freely and laughter filled the air like music, Set proclaimed that whosoever could fit perfectly within this magnificent chest would claim it as their prize. The guests tried one by one, but the sarcophagus had been crafted with dark precision to match only the measurements of Osiris himself. When the green god lay within its cedar embrace, Set's followers sealed the lid with molten lead and cast the coffin into the Nile's eternal current. The waters carried Osiris far from the land he had loved so well, beyond the cataracts and into foreign realms where his story would become legend. In the distant city of Byblos, the chest came to rest against a tamarisk tree that grew with supernatural swiftness, its trunk expanding to enclose the sarcophagus within its woody embrace. The tree became magnificent beyond all others, its fragrance carrying mysterious properties that drew the attention of the local king, who ordered it cut down to become a pillar in his palace, unknowing that within its heart lay the body of a god. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the goddess Isis began her eternal search, her mourning cries echoing across the land like the calls of kites circling above the desert. Her love for Osiris transcended death itself, driving her through marshes where crocodiles basked in primordial silence, and across sands that stretched endlessly toward horizons shimmering with heat. The magic that flowed through her divine essence was powered by grief, transformed into determination, each spell she wove carrying the intensity of a heart that refused to accept loss. Her wings, when she took the form of a great bird, cast shadows across Egypt as she searched every corner of the land that had been her husband's kingdom. Through divine intuition and magical arts that bent the very fabric of reality, Isis traced Osiris to the palace at Byblos, where she served as nursemaid to the royal children, while slowly working to claim the pillar that held her beloved's remains. The story tells how she revealed her true nature in flames that did not consume, her divine radiance filling the palace like captured starlight. The king, awed and terrified in equal measure, granted her request for the pillar, and Isis carefully extracted the sarcophagus from its wooden prison, cradling it with the tenderness of a mother holding her child. Her return to Egypt should have marked the end of sorrow, but Set's hatred had not cooled with time's passage. Finding the hidden place where Isis had concealed Osiris, the red god unleashed his fury upon the preserved body, tearing it into 14 pieces that he scattered across the length and breadth of Egypt like cursed seeds. Yet even this ultimate desecration could not defeat the power of Isis's love, for she began once more her patient search, now aided by her sister Nephthys, whose own heart had turned against Set's cruelty. Together, the sister goddesses combed through reed beds, where ibises stepped delicately through shallow waters, their long beaks probing the mud for fragments of divine flesh. They searched in temples where priests kept vigil through the dark hours, their chanted prayers rising like incense into the star-filled sky. Piece by piece, they gathered the scattered remains of Osiris, each fragment carrying within it the potential for resurrection and the promise of eternal life that would become central to Egyptian belief for thousands of years to come. When all but one piece had been recovered, lost forever in the Nile's depths, Isis called upon the deepest mysteries of her magical knowledge. The hieroglyphs describe how she fashioned herself into a kite, and through divine union with the reassembled body of Osiris, conceived a son who would carry within his blood the right to rule and the power to restore cosmic order. This child, hidden away in the marshes of the delta where papyrus reeds whispered ancient secrets, and where crocodiles served as guardians, would grow to become Horus, the falcon-headed god whose eye would become one of Egypt's most potent symbols of protection and royal power. The transformation of Osiris from murdered king to lord of the afterlife established patterns that would echo through Egyptian civilization like ripples spreading across still water. No longer bound by mortal flesh, he became the judge of the dead, weighing hearts against the feather of truth in halls where golden light revealed all secrets. His green skin symbolized the eternal renewal that followed death. The promise that life could triumph over the darkness of the tomb, just as crops emerged from the black earth after each flood. Every pharaoh who followed would claim descent from this divine lineage, their crowns carrying the authority first established when Osiris ruled over the living world. The myth resonated through Egyptian society like a great bell whose sound never fades. Its themes of death conquered, love triumphant, and legitimate rule restored, appearing in temple carvings from the earliest dynasties to the final days of pharaonic power. In every mummy carefully wrapped and placed within its sarcophagus, in every pyramid rising toward the eternal stars, in every ritual performed by priests whose voices carried across centuries, the story of Osiris lived again, promising that death was merely transformation, and that love possessed power greater than the forces of destruction that threatened the cosmic order. Beyond the grand temples and the sacred family that ruled over death and divine kingship, the ancient Egyptians populated their world with countless other deities who moved through the daily rhythms of mortal existence. These were not the distant, thundering gods of mythology, but intimate companions who dwelt within the very walls of Egyptian homes, who blessed the preparation of bread, who watched over children as they slept, and who turned their divine attention to the smallest concerns of human life. The pantheon extended far beyond the great cosmic dramas, weaving itself into the fabric of everyday experience with a tenderness and immediacy that brought the sacred into the most mundane moments. In the shadowed corners of Egyptian homes, where oil lamps flickered against mud brick walls and the scent of incense mingled with cooking fires, the household gods kept their eternal vigil. Bez, perhaps the most beloved of these domestic protectors, stood as a fierce guardian despite his diminutive stature and grotesque appearance. His dwarfish form, crowned with feathers and adorned with a lion's mane, might have seemed comical to foreign eyes, but to Egyptian families, his leonine roar and protruding tongue represented an unwavering shield against the forces of chaos and evil. His image adorned everything from furniture to cosmetic containers, his wide eyes ever watchful, his hands often grasping serpents or knives that he wielded against invisible enemies. Women in childbirth called upon his protection, trusting that his fierce countenance would drive away the demons that might threaten mother or child in those vulnerable moments between worlds. Beside Bez stood Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, whose massive form embodied both the nurturing power and the protective ferocity of motherhood. Her swollen belly, pendulous breasts, and crocodilian tail spoke of fertility and abundance, while her fearsome hippo head warned away any threat to pregnant women and newborns. In the quiet hours before dawn, when expectant mothers lay restless on their beds, they would run their fingers over small amulets bearing her image, drawing comfort from her presence. Her temples were modest affairs, often nothing more than household shrines where women would leave offerings of milk and honey, whispering prayers for safe delivery and healthy children. The goddess Bastet moved through Egyptian homes with feline grace, her dual nature reflecting the complex relationship between humans and cats in this ancient civilization. In her gentle aspect, she appeared as a domestic cat, sleek and protective, her green eyes reflecting the wisdom of ages. Egyptian families welcomed cats into their homes, not merely as companions, but as living embodiments of divine protection, creatures who carried within their purring forms the blessing of the goddess herself. When these sacred animals died, entire households would enter into mourning, shaving their eyebrows as a sign of grief, and mummifying their feline friends with the same care given to human family members. In her fiercer manifestation as the lioness Sekhmet, Bastet revealed her power to destroy as well as protect, her golden eyes blazing with solar fire, her breath carrying both healing and devastation. Khnum, the ram-headed god of the potter's wheel, brought divine craftsmanship into every humble workshop where clay was shaped into vessels for daily use. His hands, both divine and utterly practical, were said to have molded the first humans on his celestial potter's wheel, breathing life into clay forms with the same patience and skill that earthly potters brought to their craft. In the workshops along the Nile, where artisans bent over their wheels in the dancing light of oil lamps, the presence of Khnum could be felt in every perfectly centered vessel, every smooth rim, every graceful curve that emerged from shapeless earth. The god's blessing was sought not only by potters but by all who worked with their hands, for he represented the divine spark of creativity that transformed raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. Sobek, the crocodile god, ruled over the life-giving waters of the Nile with an authority that was both nurturing and terrifying. His temples, built along the river's edge, where the sound of lapping water provided a constant hymn, housed living crocodiles that were pampered and adorned as earthly representatives of the deity. These sacred reptiles wore golden earrings and jeweled collars, fed on the finest meats, and treated with a reverence that acknowledged their divine nature. Fishermen and sailors knew that Sobek's favor could mean the difference between a bountiful catch and a watery grave, between safe passage and becoming prey to the very creatures they worshipped. His priests, their skin darkened by long hours in the sun, performed daily rituals at the water's edge, pouring libations into the muddy current while reciting prayers that had echoed along these banks for millennia. In the grain fields that stretched in golden waves beside the river, Renanutet, the cobra goddess of harvest and nourishment, moved unseen through the ripening stalks. Her serpentine form, both beautiful and deadly, embodied the dual nature of the harvest season, when abundance and survival hung in delicate balance. Farmers would find small shrines dedicated to her at field edges, simple affairs built of mud brick and decorated with painted cobras, whose eyes seemed to follow the movements of workers as they bent to their tasks. The goddess was particularly protective of children, and mothers would place small amulets bearing her image around their babies' necks, believing that her watchful presence would ensure the child would never know hunger. The god, Ta, patron of craftsmen and architects, brought divine order to every workshop and construction site throughout the kingdom. His mummiform appearance, wrapped tightly, except for his hands which gripped the scepter, the Jed pillar, and the Ankh, marked him as a creator deity whose power lay in the word made manifest in physical form. In the great stone-cutting yards where obelisks took shape under the desert sun, workers believed they could feel Ta's presence guiding their chisels, ensuring that each hieroglyph was perfectly formed, each joint precisely fitted. The god's creative power was not the explosive force of other deities, but the patient, methodical work of master craftsmen who understood that true creation required both vision and the countless small acts of skill that brought that vision into being. These household protectors and earthly gods created a sacred landscape that extended far beyond temple walls, transforming every Egyptian home into a place where the divine and mortal realms intersected. Their presence was not announced by thunder or earthquake, but by the gentle blessing of daily bread that rose properly, by children who slept peacefully through the night, by craftsmen whose hands produced work of exceptional beauty. They were the gods who understood that life was lived not in grand gestures, but in countless small moments, and their protection was offered not to heroes and pharaohs alone, but to every person who sought to live with dignity, creativity, and care for others. In acknowledging these humble yet powerful deities, the ancient Egyptians created a religious system that sanctified not just the extraordinary, but the beautifully ordinary. Finding the sacred in the rhythm of daily existence, and the eternal in the most temporal of human concerns. While Bez danced in the shadows of humble doorways, and Taweret watched over newborn children, a far grander manifestation of divine power rose with the sun each morning in the form of the pharaoh himself. The ruler of Egypt was not merely a king blessed by the gods, but the living embodiment of divinity walking upon the earth, his mortal flesh housing the eternal spirit of Horus, while his Ka connected him directly to the cosmic order that governed all existence. Every gesture of his hand, every word that passed his lips, every breath that filled his lungs carried the weight of divine authority, transforming earthly decrees into sacred commandments that rippled through both the physical and spiritual realms. The pharaoh's divine nature was understood to flow through his very bloodline, a sacred inheritance passed down from father to son, like liquid gold poured from one sacred vessel to another. This was not political theatre or royal propaganda, but fundamental religious truth that permeated every aspect of Egyptian society, for the pharaoh served as the crucial bridge between the world of mortals and the realm of the gods. His presence maintained the delicate balance of Ma'at, ensuring that chaos did not overwhelm order, that the Nile continued its life-giving floods, and that the sun continued its eternal journey across the heavens. Without the pharaoh's divine essence actively sustaining it, the entire cosmos would collapse into primordial darkness. The architectural monuments that rose around these god-kings reflected their cosmic significance through every precisely carved stone and carefully calculated angle. The pyramids of Giza, those eternal guardians of the desert, were not merely tombs but sophisticated magical machines designed to facilitate the pharaoh's transformation from earthly ruler to stellar deity. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, with its internal chambers aligned to specific stars and its passages oriented toward cardinal directions, functioned as a vast resurrection device, channeling celestial energies downward while projecting the pharaoh's divine essence upward into the imperishable stars, where he would reign for eternity. Each pyramid complex formed a complete religious ecosystem, with satellite pyramids housing the remains of queens who shared in the royal divinity, mortuary temples where daily rituals maintained the deceased pharaoh's continued existence, and causeways that served as sacred pathways connecting the earthly realm to the celestial sphere. The limestone blocks, quarried from the living rock of Egypt and hauled across vast distances, were transformed through ritual purification into sacred building material worthy of housing divine essence. Master craftsmen worked under the guidance of priest architects who understood not only the physical principles of construction, but the metaphysical properties of geometric forms and their ability to focus and amplify spiritual energy. The temples that dotted the Nile Valley, like jewels strung along a sacred necklace, represented another manifestation of divine architecture, their walls rising not merely to shelter statues and house priests, but to create spaces where the boundary between heaven and earth became gossamer thin. The Temple of Karnak, expanding across centuries of pharaonic devotion, grew into a stone forest of columns that seemed to reach toward the stars themselves, each surface carved with hieroglyphic prayers and offering scenes that maintained a constant dialogue between the mortal and divine realms. Within these sacred precincts, the pharaoh performed the daily ritual of opening the mouth of the gods, awakening the divine statues with prayers and offerings that ensured the continued benevolence of the celestial powers. The inner sanctuaries of these temples, hidden behind multiple layers of courts and halls, created a gradual progression from the bright public spaces where common people might glimpse religious ceremonies to the mysterious darkness of the Holy of Holies, where only the pharaoh or his designated high priest could enter. This architectural journey, from light to shadow, from the profane to the sacred, mirrored the spiritual transformation that every soul would undergo in death, moving from the familiar world of daylight and human activity into the mysterious realm where gods dwelt in eternal silence. The walls grew higher and the passages narrower as one approached the divine presence, creating a sense of ascending toward heaven while simultaneously descending into the primordial depths of creation. Golden statues housed within these sacred chambers were not mere representations of the gods, but their actual earthly forms, invested with divine ka through elaborate consecration rituals that transformed precious metal into living deity. The pharaoh's daily ministrations to these divine images, washing them with sacred water, clothing them in fine linen, offering them bread and beer and sweet incense, maintained the reciprocal relationship between divine and mortal realms that kept the world in proper balance. These rituals, performed in chambers lit only by flickering oil lamps, created an atmosphere of mystery and reverence that reinforced the pharaoh's unique position as intermediary between humanity and the gods. The decoration of temple walls followed precise theological programs that transformed stone surfaces into complex religious texts written in images and hieroglyphs. Scenes of the pharaoh making offerings to various deities were not historical records, but active magical formulas that continued to function long after the particular king had joined the imperishable stars. Each carved relief carried spiritual power, the ancient artists understanding that their work served not merely aesthetic purposes, but participated in the ongoing creation and maintenance of cosmic order. The colors applied to these stone canvases, deep blues derived from lapis lazuli, brilliant golds hammered from precious metal, vivid reds ground from ochre, were chosen not only for their beauty, but for their magical properties and their ability to channel specific divine energies. Temple complexes included vast workshops where priests and craftsmen labored to create the objects necessary for proper worship, golden vessels for libations, silver incense burners whose smoke carried prayers heavenward, elaborate ceremonial weapons that symbolized the pharaoh's role as cosmic warrior, battling the forces of chaos. These sacred workshops hummed with activity as skilled artisans transformed raw materials into objects worthy of divine attention. Their work guided by tradition that stretched back to the very foundation of Egyptian civilization. The creation of each ritual object followed prescribed patterns and required specific purifications, ensuring that every item that entered the god's presence carried the proper spiritual charge. The pyramid texts, carved into the burial chamber walls of later pharaohs, revealed the sophisticated theology that underlay these massive architectural undertakings. These ancient spells and prayers mapped out the deceased pharaoh's journey through the afterlife with the precision of celestial navigation charts, providing magical formulas that would transform the dead king into a star god capable of traversing the heavens in the solar bark of Ra. The hieroglyphic inscriptions, their symbols carefully chosen for both meaning and magical potency, created a permanent record of divine power that would continue to function throughout eternity, ensuring that the pharaoh's transformation into deity remained complete and irreversible. Sacred lakes within temple complexes provided the pure water necessary for ritual purifications, their surfaces reflecting the sky and creating symbolic connections between the earthly temple and the celestial realm. Priests purified themselves in these sacred pools before approaching the gods, emerging from the water ritually reborn and worthy to stand in divine presence. The lakes also served as stages for religious festivals, where the gods' statues were carried in golden barks that sailed across their surfaces, reenacting the daily journey of the sun god across the heavenly waters, while thousands of worshippers gathered along the shores to witness these manifestations of divine power moving through their world like distant thunder made visible. The pharaohs, those living gods who walked among mortals, understood that their divine nature demanded preparation for an existence that would stretch beyond the boundaries of earthly time. As the great pyramids and temples stood as monuments to their godhood in life, so too did their mortal forms require transformation through sacred arts that would preserve not merely flesh and bone, but the very essence of divine spirit itself. The ancient Egyptians had developed over millennia a profound understanding that death was not an ending, but a transition, a doorway through which the soul would pass into realms where the gods themselves held court among eternal stars. The sacred art of mummification emerged from this divine imperative, a practice so intricate and reverent that it occupied the devoted attention of entire communities of craftsmen, priests, and spiritual guardians. Within the halls of the Per-Nefer, the beautiful house where these transformations took place, the air hung heavy with the scents of natron salt, cedar oils, and burning incense that carried prayers to the gods above. These workshops, often situated on the western bank of the Nile, where the sun completed its daily journey into the underworld, became sanctuaries where the boundary between life and death dissolved into something far more profound than mere preservation of the physical form. The priests who oversaw these sacred procedures approached their work with the solemnity of those who understood they were facilitating a cosmic transformation. Dressed in the masks of Anubis, the jackal-headed god who guided souls through the mysteries of death, they became living embodiments of divine will. Their movements followed patterns established by the gods themselves, each gesture calculated not merely for practical preservation, but for spiritual preparation. The chief embalmer wore the mask of Anubis throughout the 70-day process, never speaking in his own voice, but channeling the words and wisdom of the god who had first mummified the scattered pieces of Osiris himself. The initial stages of mummification required the careful removal of organs that would decay and corrupt the body's journey to eternity. Through a small incision in the left side of the abdomen, the embalmers would extract the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines with instruments crafted specifically for these sacred purposes. Each organ was treated not as waste to be discarded, but as a vital component of the soul's eternal vessel, requiring its own careful preservation and blessing. The liver, seat of emotion and courage, was placed in the canopic jar, watched over by Imseti, the human-headed son of Horus. The lungs, which had drawn the breath of life, found protection under Hapi, the baboon-headed guardian who ensured that breath would return in the afterlife. The stomach, which had nourished the body in life, was entrusted to Dua Mutef, the jackal-headed protector who would ensure sustenance in the realm beyond death. The intestines, complex and winding as the journey through the underworld itself, received the protection of Kebes-Anuef, the falcon-headed son of Horus, who would guide the deceased through the labyrinthine passages of the afterlife. These 4 canopic jars, carved from limestone or crafted from clay, were more than mere containers. They were sacred vessels that housed the physical foundations of consciousness itself, each one blessed with spells and incantations that would maintain the organ's vitality throughout eternity. The brain, though less understood in its function than the heart, was carefully extracted through the nasal passages using long bronze hooks that curved and twisted with the skill of master craftsmen. This delicate procedure required steady hands and profound concentration, as any damage to the skull could compromise the soul's ability to recognize its own form in the afterlife. The removed brain matter was not preserved separately, but was discarded, as the ancient Egyptians believed the heart to be the true seat of intelligence, memory, and soul. The empty cranial cavity was then filled with linen soaked in resin, ensuring that the head would maintain its shape and dignity throughout the long process of desiccation and beyond. The heart, that most precious organ, remained within the chest cavity throughout the mummification process, protected by powerful amulets and surrounded by prayers that would ensure its proper function during the weighing ceremony that awaited every soul in the Hall of Ma'at. This organ, believed to contain the complete record of a person's deeds, thoughts, and character, could not be separated from the body, lest the soul arrive incomplete at the judgment of Osiris. Special care was taken to position the heart correctly, sometimes replacing it with a heart scarab carved from green stone and inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead that would prevent the heart from testifying against its owner during the crucial moment of divine judgment. The process of desiccation began with the careful packing of the body cavity with natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate that drew moisture from tissues while preventing decay. The body was then covered completely in natron salt, creating a pristine white burial that would preserve flesh, skin, and bone for thousands of years. This salt, mined from the shores of sacred lakes in the desert, was considered a gift from the gods themselves, possessing purifying properties that extended far beyond mere preservation. For 40 days, the body rested in this crystalline embrace, while moisture slowly departed and the physical form prepared itself for eternal existence. During this period of desiccation, priests maintained constant vigils, offering prayers and burning incense that would protect the soul during its vulnerable state between life and true death. The air in the Pur-Nefer filled with the rhythmic chanting of sacred texts, the words rising and falling like the breath of the gods themselves. Specific prayers were recited at dawn, noon, and dusk, marking the passage of Ra's solar bark across the heavens, and ensuring that the deceased would be ready to join this eternal journey when the time came for final resurrection. After the 40 days of salt curing, the body emerged transformed, its skin darkened and hardened, but perfectly preserved. The embalmers washed away the natron with palm wine and water from the sacred Nile, then began the intricate process of restoration that would return the deceased to a semblance of life. Oils and resins, many imported from distant lands at enormous expense, were massaged into the skin to restore suppleness and create a protective barrier against the ravages of time. Cedar oil from Lebanon, frankincense from Punt, and myrrh from Arabia all played their roles in this resurrection, their precious essences carrying the prayers of the living to the realm of the gods. The wrapping of the mummy represented the final and most crucial stage of the transformation, a process that could take up to 15 days to complete properly. Beginning with the individual fingers and toes, each digit was wrapped separately in fine linen strips that had been blessed and anointed with oils. The hands and feet received additional layers, with amulets placed between the wrappings at precise locations that corresponded to the spiritual anatomy understood by priests and physicians. These protective charms, fashioned from gold, silver, and precious stones, would guard specific aspects of the soul's journey and provide power for the various challenges that awaited in the underworld. The torso and limbs received hundreds of yards of linen in carefully overlapped layers, each strip positioned according to patterns that had been perfected over generations of sacred practice. Between these layers, amulets were placed at intervals determined by ancient formulas, creating a constellation of protective power that surrounded the deceased like a cocoon of divine energy. The Jed pillar, symbol of Osiris's backbone and eternal stability, was positioned over the spine. The Tayet knot, representing the blood of Isis and her protective power, was placed near the heart. The Ankh, symbol of life itself, was positioned where it could channel the breath of eternity into the preserved form. As the wrapping progressed upward toward the head, the prayers became more intense, and the positioning of amulets more crucial. The throat received special attention, as this was where the soul would need to speak the words of power that would grant passage through the gates of the underworld. The face was wrapped with particular care, ensuring that the features remained recognizable while providing complete protection. The final layer was often a shroud of the finest linen, sometimes dyed with precious colors or decorated with images of the gods who would welcome the deceased into their eternal company. The completed mummy, sealed within its nest of protective wrappings and divine amulets, represented far more than preserved human remains. It was a vessel prepared for eternity, a form that could house the returning soul when the time came for resurrection in the eternal fields of Aru. Every aspect of the process, from the initial purification to the final blessing, had been designed to ensure that death would prove temporary, and that the divine spark within each person would burn brightly throughout all the ages to come. With the sacred wrappings secure and the soul prepared for its eternal journey, the deceased would begin their passage into the Duat, that mysterious realm beyond the veil of mortal existence. The ancient Egyptians envisioned this underworld as a vast, complex landscape that stretched beneath the earth and beyond the western horizon, where Ra's solar bark disappeared each evening. Here, in this shadowy domain, the soul would encounter wonders and terrors that would test every aspect of their earthly preparation. The journey commenced as darkness fell across the Nile Valley, when the boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the dead grew thin as papyrus. The soul, now transformed into the Ak, would join the great procession that followed Ra's golden vessel through the 12 hours of night. This solar bark, magnificent beyond mortal comprehension, glided silently through waters that reflected no earthly light, its hull carved with hieroglyphs that pulsed with divine power. The vessel moved with the steady rhythm of eternity itself, carrying the sun god in his ram-headed nocturnal form through territories where time flowed like honey and distance meant nothing. In the first hours of this celestial voyage, the landscape of the Duat revealed itself as a realm of impossible geography, where rivers flowed upward towards stars that hung like jewels in an obsidian sky. Islands of sand floated in lakes of liquid silver, and forests of sycamore trees grew with their roots reaching toward heaven and their branches extending deep into the earth. The air itself hummed with magic, thick with the whispered prayers of millions who had passed this way before, their voices creating a symphony that resonated through the bones of reality. The souls of the dead would encounter their first trials as they navigated the lake of fire, forward, where flames danced upon the water's surface without consuming it. These were not ordinary flames, but manifestations of purification, burning away the last vestiges of earthly attachment and fear. Some souls passed through unharmed, their righteousness creating a protective aura that parted the fires like reeds before a gentle breeze. Others found themselves struggling against currents of molten light that tested their resolve and their worthiness to continue the sacred journey. As the procession moved deeper into the duat, the trials grew more elaborate and more perilous. Serpents of incredible size coiled around the path ahead, their scales gleaming like polished copper in the strange twilight. These were not mere beasts, but guardians of ancient wisdom, each one a keeper of secrets that predated the dynasties of mortal pharaohs. The serpent Apophis, greatest and most terrible of these creatures, waited in the deepest hour of night with jaws that could swallow entire worlds. This primordial enemy of order and light represented the chaos that existed before creation, and its presence filled the duat with an energy that made the very foundations of existence tremble. The souls would witness the nightly battle between Ra and Apophis, a cosmic struggle that played out in dimensions beyond human perception. As the solar bark approached the serpent's domain, the water around it began to churn and bubble with anticipation. Apophis would rise from the depths, its coils creating whirlpools of darkness that threatened to drag down everything in their path. The battle that ensued was both physical and metaphysical. A clash between the forces of creation and destruction that had been repeated every night since the world began. In this moment of supreme danger, the deceased would discover the true power of the spells and incantations that had been inscribed upon their wrappings and within their tomb walls. These were not mere words, but weapons of divine authority, phrases that could command the elements and bend the will of demons. The soul that knew the proper formulas could speak words of power that would cause Apophis to recoil, its massive form writhing in frustration as the ordered universe reasserted its dominance over primordial chaos. Beyond the serpent's realm lay the Hall of the Two Truths, perhaps the most crucial location in all the duat. This vast chamber existed in a space between spaces, its walls rising to heights that seemed to touch the underside of the sky. 42 judges sat in solemn array, each one representing a different aspect of moral law and cosmic justice. These divine assessors had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, their ancient eyes holding the accumulated wisdom of eons. Their presence filled the hall with an atmosphere of profound gravity, where every thought and deed of the deceased's earthly life would be examined with perfect clarity. The heart of the deceased, that organ which the embalmers had so carefully preserved or replaced with amulets of protection, would be brought forward for the ultimate test. Upon golden scales that never erred in their judgment, this heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, that perfect symbol of truth and righteousness. The feather, lighter than air, yet heavier than mountains in its significance, represented the ideal to which every soul aspired. As it settled upon one side of the scales, the entire cosmos seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The process of judgment unfolded with deliberate ceremony, each moment heavy with consequence. The heart, containing within its essence every choice the soul had made during mortal life, would either rise or fall according to its accumulated weight of deeds. Those hearts that proved heavier than the feather would tip the scales toward damnation, their owners destined for the waiting jaws of Ammit, the devourer of souls. This creature, with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, represented the final extinction that awaited those who had lived without regard for cosmic order. For those souls whose hearts balanced perfectly against the feather, a transformation of unimaginable beauty would begin. The successful deceased would be declared justified, or true of voice, their earthly names now spoken with reverence by the divine court. They would be welcomed into the presence of Osiris himself, that green-skinned lord of the afterlife, who had undergone his own death and resurrection to become the ultimate judge of souls. In his presence, surrounded by the other gods of the Ennead, the soul would receive the final blessing that would grant access to the field of reeds. This paradise, known as Sehet Aru, stretched beyond the trials of judgment, like an idealized version of the Nile Delta. Here, golden wheat grew taller than a man could reach, and barley rippled in breezes that carried the perfume of lotus blossoms across waters that flowed with the essence of life itself. The justified dead would find themselves in bodies restored to the perfection of youth, their forms radiant with divine light and free from the limitations that had bound them in mortal flesh. They would spend eternity in this realm of perpetual abundance. Their days filled with activities that brought them joy, and their nights illuminated by stars that sang the songs of creation. The journey through the duat thus represented far more than a simple passage from life to death. It was a complete transformation of existence, a process that tested every aspect of the soul's development and ultimately granted those who proved worthy a form of immortality that transcended the boundaries of mortal understanding. The ancient Egyptians, who prepared so carefully for this voyage, who filled their tombs with spells and provisions, and who submitted to the elaborate rituals of mummification, understood that death was not an ending, but a beginning of the most important journey any soul could undertake. Having navigated the treacherous waters of the duat and survived the trials that tested every aspect of their earthly existence, the souls of the deceased found themselves approaching the most sacred and decisive moment of their eternal journey. Beyond the caverns of serpents and lakes of fire, beyond the gates guarded by knife-wielding demons, lay a vast hall of impossible grandeur, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to stretch toward infinity itself. This was the Hall of Two Truths, known in ancient Egyptian as the Hall of Ma'at, where the fundamental order of the universe would determine the fate of every soul that dared to enter its hallowed confines. The hall stretched before the approaching spirits like a cathedral of cosmic justice, its walls adorned with hieroglyphs that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, telling stories of divine law and universal balance that had governed existence since the first dawn broke over the primordial waters. Massive columns, each carved from single blocks of celestial stone, rose from floors polished to mirror perfection, their surfaces reflecting not the physical forms of those who walked upon them, but rather the true essence of each soul, revealing virtues and failings in equal measure. The air itself thrummed with an energy both terrible and beautiful, charged with the weight of countless judgments rendered, and the promise of eternal consequences that could neither be appealed nor overturned. At the center of this magnificent chamber stood the golden scales of justice, their gleaming plates suspended from a balance arm wrought from meteoric metal that had fallen from the realm of the gods themselves. These were no ordinary scales, for they possessed the divine ability to weigh not physical matter, but the very substance of morality, the accumulated weight of every deed, thought, and intention that had shaped a lifetime's worth of choices. The scales rested upon a pedestal, carved with intricate reliefs depicting the eternal struggle between order and chaos, truth and deception, righteousness and corruption, serving as a constant reminder that every action in life carried consequences that would echo through eternity. Beside the scales stood Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and divine judgment, his long curved beak gleaming like polished obsidian in the supernatural light that filled the hall. In his hands he held the tools of his sacred office, a reed pen carved from the first papyrus that grew along the banks of the celestial Nile, and a scroll of papyrus that would record the outcome of each judgment with ink that could never fade or be erased. His eyes, ancient beyond measure and filled with the accumulated knowledge of countless ages, missed nothing as they observed each soul that approached the scales, reading the history written in their spiritual essence as easily as a scribe might read hieroglyphs carved in stone. The goddess Ma'at herself presided over the proceedings, her tall, graceful form adorned with the single ostrich feather that served as both her symbol and the standard against which every heart would be measured. This feather, pure white and seemingly weightless as it swayed gently in the ethereal breezes that stirred through the hall, represented the perfect balance of truth, justice, and cosmic order that formed the foundation of all existence. Her presence brought a sense of absolute fairness to the proceedings. For Ma'at was incapable of prejudice or corruption, knowing only the immutable laws that governed the universe and the unwavering principles that distinguished right from wrong. When the moment of judgment arrived, the deceased would approach the scales with trembling anticipation, their basol clutching the heart that had been so carefully preserved within their mummified form during the long process of preparation for the afterlife. This heart, the seat of intelligence, memory, and moral character in ancient Egyptian belief, contained within its chambers every moment of joy and sorrow, every act of kindness and cruelty, every truth spoken, and every lie uttered during the course of their earthly existence. As they placed this most precious organ upon one plate of the divine scales, the weight of their entire moral life settled with it, creating a tension that seemed to make the very air in the hall hold its breath. On the opposite plate, Mart's feather was placed with infinite care, its pure white surface catching and reflecting the golden light that emanated from the walls and ceiling of the sacred chamber. The feather appeared to weigh nothing at all, yet in the cosmic mathematics of divine justice, it carried the weight of perfect truth and absolute righteousness, serving as the ultimate standard against which every human heart would be measured. The scales would begin to move with agonizing slowness, each minute shift carrying implications that would determine whether the soul would proceed to the blessed fields of Aru or face the terrible second death that awaited those found wanting. Standing in solemn witness to these proceedings was Osiris himself, the great judge of the dead, seated upon his throne of judgment at the far end of the hall. His form was wrapped in the white linen bandages of mummification, symbolizing his own death and resurrection, while his hands grasped the crook and flail that marked his authority over the realm of the deceased. His skin bore the green hue of regeneration and eternal life, speaking to his role as the god who had conquered death itself, and now offered that same possibility to those who proved themselves worthy through righteous living. His eyes, filled with compassion, tempered by unwavering justice, gazed upon each soul with the understanding of one who had himself experienced the anguish of mortality and the triumph of rebirth. Arrayed around Osiris stood the 42 assessor gods, each representing a different aspect of moral law and ethical behavior, their diverse forms creating a pantheon of divine witnesses to the judgment proceedings. Some appeared with the heads of hawks, their sharp eyes missing no detail of the soul's character, while others bore the visages of crocodiles, lions, and serpents, their fearsome appearances serving to underscore the gravity of the moment. Each of these deities was responsible for evaluating specific aspects of the deceased's moral conduct, from honesty in business dealings to kindness toward animals, from respect for parents to faithfulness in marriage, ensuring that every facet of ethical behavior received proper consideration. The souls who had led lives of righteousness and truth found their hearts as light as Mart's feather, the scales achieving perfect balance as divine approval settled over the proceedings like a gentle benediction. These fortunate spirits would hear Thoth announce their vindication in words that resonated through the hall like celestial music, declaring them justified and true of voice, worthy to continue their journey to the eternal paradise that awaited beyond the hall's great doors. Their faces would shine with relief and joy as they realized that their careful adherence to the principles of Mart during their earthly existence had earned them the ultimate reward of eternal life in the presence of the gods themselves. But for those whose hearts proved heavier than the feather of truth, weighed down by the accumulated burden of selfishness, cruelty, dishonesty, or neglect of their moral obligations, the scales would tip with terrible finality toward damnation. In the shadows at the edge of the hall lurked Amit, the soul devourer, her form a terrifying amalgamation of crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus, the three most feared creatures of ancient Egypt, combined into a single entity of ultimate destruction. Her massive jaws, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, waited to consume the hearts of the unworthy, condemning them to a second death from which there could be no resurrection, no hope of continuation in any form whatsoever. The judgment rendered in the Hall of Two Truths was absolute and irreversible, carried out according to principles that had governed the universe since its creation and would continue to do so until the end of time itself. This divine court recognized no appeals, no technicalities, no influence of wealth or social position that might have swayed earthly judges, for here only the pure truth of moral character mattered, stripped of all pretense and revealed in its naked essence. The ancient Egyptians understood that this moment of judgment gave profound meaning to every choice made during life. transforming each day's decisions into threads in the tapestry of eternal destiny that would ultimately determine their soul's fate in the cosmic scales of divine justice. Beyond the great scales where hearts were weighed against the feather of Ma'at, beyond the solemn pronouncement of Osiris in his Hall of Truth, lay a vast network of magical practices that connected the mortal world to the realm of the gods. These were not mere superstitions whispered in shadowed corners, but elaborate systems of knowledge that formed the very foundation of Egyptian civilization, binding together the living and the dead, the earthly and the divine, in an intricate web of sacred power. The ancient Egyptians understood magic not as something separate from religion or daily life, but as the fundamental force that animated all existence. They called it Heka, a word that encompassed both the divine energy that flowed through the cosmos and the practical techniques used to harness that energy. Heka was simultaneously a god, a force of nature, and a tool wielded by those who possessed the knowledge to speak the proper words and perform the necessary rituals. In the creation myths, Heka existed before all other deities, the primordial power from which the gods themselves drew their strength to shape the world from the waters of none. Every temple throughout the land served as a repository of magical knowledge, its walls inscribed with hieroglyphic texts that contained the secret names of gods and the precise formulations needed to invoke their aid. The priests who tended these sacred spaces were not merely religious officials, but master magicians who spent decades learning to read the subtle signs woven throughout the fabric of reality. They understood that words possessed inherent power, that the very act of speaking or writing certain combinations of sounds and symbols could alter the fundamental nature of existence itself. The most precious of these magical texts were inscribed within the pyramids themselves, carved into the burial chambers of kings where they would serve their purpose for eternity. The pyramid texts, dating back over 4,000 years, represent humanity's oldest known collection of religious writings. Their hieroglyphs describing elaborate rituals designed to ensure the pharaoh's successful journey through the afterlife. These spells spoke of transformations both physical and spiritual, detailing how the deceased king might become a falcon soaring through the heavens, a star burning in the celestial dome, or one with the imperishable gods themselves. Later periods saw the democratization of these powerful formulations, as magical knowledge once reserved for royalty became available to nobles and eventually to common citizens who could afford to have the spells inscribed on their coffins or written on papyrus scrolls placed within their tombs. The coffin texts and the famous Book of the Dead preserved hundreds of these magical utterances, each designed to address specific challenges the soul might encounter during its perilous journey through the duat. The creation of these texts required not only knowledge of the proper words, but also understanding of the sacred materials used to record them. Papyrus was itself considered magical, its fibers drawn from the marshes where creation first emerged from chaos. The ink used for writing combined soot from sacred fires with water blessed in temple ceremonies, while the reed pens were cut according to specific ritual requirements. Each stage of the process was accompanied by prayers and offerings, transforming the act of writing into a magical ritual that imbued the finished text with divine power. Protective amulets served as another crucial bridge between the mortal and divine realms, their small forms containing concentrated magical energy that could be carried close to the body throughout life and death. The workshops of skilled craftsmen throughout Egypt produced thousands upon thousands of these powerful objects, each shaped according to ancient traditions and inscribed with hieroglyphs that activated their protective properties. The scarab beetle, sacred to the god Khepri, who pushed the sun across the sky each day, became one of the most popular amulet forms, its hard shell symbolizing protection, while its connection to the daily solar cycle promised rebirth and renewal. The Djed pillar, representing the backbone of Osiris, offered stability and endurance to those who wore it, its stepped form echoing the architecture of sacred buildings and the layered nature of existence itself. Amulets, shaped like the Ankh, the hieroglyphic symbol for life, channeled the life-giving power of the gods directly into the wearer's body, while the Eye of Horus provided protection against both physical harm and spiritual corruption. Each symbol carried layers of meaning, accumulated over thousands of years of religious practice, their forms refined through countless generations of craftsmen who understood the precise proportions and details necessary to make them effective. The materials chosen for these amulets were equally important, each substance possessing its own magical properties that could enhance or modify the power of the symbol it formed. Gold, incorruptible and eternal like the flesh of the gods, was reserved for the most precious amulets, while silver represented the bones of the deities and the pure light of the moon. Turquoise brought the protection of Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, while carnelian carried the fiery energy of the sun god Ra. Lapis lazuli, with its deep blue color flecked with golden pyrite, recreated the star-studded night sky and connected the wearer to the cosmic order that governed all existence. The process of creating these amulets involved elaborate rituals that began with the selection of raw materials and continued through every stage of manufacture. Craftsmen worked according to calendars that identified the most auspicious days for beginning different types of magical objects, timing their efforts to align with the movements of celestial bodies and the festivals of relevant deities. The tools used in shaping the amulets were consecrated in temple ceremonies, while the workshops themselves were purified with incense and blessed water before any work could begin. The activation of finished amulets required additional ceremonies that transformed carved stone or molded metal into vessels for divine power. Priests spoke specific incantations over each piece, calling upon the gods to inhabit the symbolic forms and grant them the ability to protect their wearers. Some amulets were placed within temple sanctuaries for prescribed periods, allowing them to absorb the sacred energy that permeated these holy spaces, while others were carried in ritual processions where they could be blessed by the direct presence of the deities they served. The most powerful amulets combined multiple symbols and materials in complex arrangements that addressed various aspects of protection and empowerment. Pectorals, worn by pharaohs and high officials, featured elaborate scenes showing the king receiving life and dominion from the gods. These miniature masterpieces, serving both as declarations of divine authority and as magical shields against any force that might threaten royal power. The intricate craftsmanship required to create such pieces represented generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down through families of artisans who guarded their secrets as carefully as temple priests protected their ritual formulations. During the mummification process, specific amulets were placed at designated locations within the wrappings, their positions corresponding to magical texts that described their protective functions in precise detail. The heart scarab, inscribed with Chapter 30b of the Book of the Dead, was positioned over the mummified heart to prevent it from testifying against the deceased during the weighing ceremony. Other amulets protected individual organs, limbs, and body openings, creating a comprehensive magical armor that would shield the deceased throughout their journey in the afterlife. The living also relied upon protective amulets in their daily existence, wearing them as jewelry or sewing them into their clothing to ward off illness, accidents, and malevolent magical attacks. Children received their first amulets at birth, tiny protective devices that would grow in number and complexity as they matured into adulthood. Pregnant women wore special combinations of symbols designed to ensure safe childbirth, while travelers carried amulets that would protect them during their journeys through the dangerous lands beyond Egypt's borders. The magical traditions surrounding these objects created a parallel economy of blessing and protection, where skilled magicians supplemented their temple duties by creating personalized amulets for individual clients. These practitioners combined traditional forms with innovative arrangements tailored to specific needs and circumstances, their work representing the living evolution of magical practice as it adapted to changing times, while maintaining its connection to ancient wisdom. Their workshops became centers of learning, where aspiring magicians could observe the creation process and gradually acquire the knowledge needed to work their own transformations upon the boundary between the mortal and divine worlds. Beyond the trials of judgment, beyond the weighing of hearts and the proclamation of righteousness, lay the ultimate destination of every purified soul, the field of reeds. That eternal paradise where the blessed dead would dwell forever, in perfect harmony with the divine order of creation. This sacred realm, known to the ancient Egyptians as Sekhet Aru, stretched endlessly beneath skies that never knew storm or shadow, where the son of Ra sailed eternally overhead in perpetual splendor, casting its golden light across landscapes of impossible beauty and abundance. The Field of Reeds appeared as an idealized version of the Nile Valley itself, but perfected beyond earthly imagination, where every grain of sand gleamed like crushed pearls, and every blade of grass stood emerald green against soil rich as black velvet. Here, the great river flowed with waters so clear they reflected not just the heavens above, but the very essence of eternity itself, carrying lotus blossoms that never wilted, and fish that swam in schools of living silver through currents that whispered ancient hymns of praise. The banks rose gently on either side, carpeted with papyrus that swayed in breezes perfumed with frankincense and myrrh, while date palms heavy with golden fruit cast shadows that offered respite without darkness, coolness without cold. In this blessed realm, the justified dead found themselves restored to perfect physical form, their bodies renewed to the prime of youth, yet infused with the wisdom of their earthly years. They walked once more on legs that never tired, breathed with lungs that never labored, and saw through eyes that perceived not just the beauty around them, but the divine presence that suffused every moment of existence. Their Ka and Ba, reunited with their perfected bodies, experienced a completeness that mortal life had only hinted at, an integration of being that allowed them to exist simultaneously as individuals and as part of the greater cosmic harmony. The agriculture of paradise unfolded in fields that stretched to horizons bathed in eternal twilight, where wheat grew tall as cedar trees, and barley waves rippled like golden seas beneath the caress of winds that carried the voices of gods. Here, the blessed souls could labor if they chose, but their work became a form of worship, a joyful participation in the cycles of growth and harvest that reflected the eternal renewal of creation itself. The grain they gathered never diminished, the wells they drew from never ran dry, and the bread they baked fed both body and spirit with sustenance that nourished the soul as much as the flesh. Throughout this realm wandered beings of impossible grace and beauty, not just the justified dead, but the Neteru themselves in their most benevolent aspects. Thoth could be glimpsed walking among reed beds, his ibis head gleaming white against the green, as he recorded the names of the blessed in books that wrote themselves with letters of light. Hathor danced in groves where fruit hung heavy and sweet, her movements causing flowers to bloom in her footsteps, and music to ripple through the air like visible joy. Tar crafted wonders from the very substance of paradise, his hands shaping beauty from the raw materials of eternity, while Khnum worked at potter's wheels that turned with the rhythm of cosmic cycles, forming vessels to hold the nectar of immortal bliss. The dwellings of the blessed rose from the landscape like natural formations, their walls built from stones that sang in harmony when touched by morning light, their roofs thatched with reeds that gleamed like spun gold and never needed repair. Within these homes, the furniture arranged itself according to the desires of their inhabitants, and the walls displayed paintings that moved and changed, showing scenes from the dweller's earthly life transformed into moments of perfect beauty and meaning. Gardens surrounded each dwelling, where flowers bloomed in colors that had no names in mortal tongues, and trees bore fruits that satisfied every hunger of both body and soul. Rivers within rivers flowed through this paradise, each one carrying different gifts to the blessed dead. One stream bore the memories of loved ones still living on earth, allowing the departed to witness the continuing lives of those they had left behind, but filtered through divine compassion so that only joy and love remained visible. Another carried the essence of all earthly pleasures, refined to their spiritual essence. The laughter of children transformed into music that healed ancient sorrows, the warmth of sunlight concentrated into liquid gold that could be drunk like wine, the comfort of home distilled into an atmosphere of perfect peace that surrounded each soul like an invisible embrace. Time moved differently in the field of reeds, not in the forward march of mortal days, but in great, slow spirals that allowed each moment to be experienced fully before flowing into the next. The blessed dead could spend what would have been centuries on earth, exploring a single garden, watching the play of light on water, or listening to the conversations between flowers and butterflies. They could also compress eons of experience into what felt like heartbeats, traveling vast distances through pure intention or communing with the gods in dialogues that encompassed the wisdom of ages. The social bonds of paradise transcended those of earthly life, as souls recognized each other not by physical appearance, but by the light of their true nature. Families reunited across generations, their love purified of earthly complications and enhanced by divine understanding. Friends from different lifetimes discovered connections that had existed before birth and would continue beyond the boundaries of individual existence. Even strangers became intimates, as the blessed dead recognized the fundamental unity that connected all justified souls in their shared journey toward divine truth. Music filled the air of paradise constantly, not as sound imposed from without, but as the natural expression of harmony between all created things. The rustling of reeds became percussion sections of infinite complexity, while birdsongs wove melodies that told stories of creation and redemption. The footsteps of the blessed added rhythm to this eternal symphony, and their voices, when raised in song, created harmonies that resonated through the very fabric of reality, adding new verses to the great hymn of existence that had been singing since the first moment of creation. The lakes of paradise reflected more than images. They showed the true nature of whatever gazed into their depths, revealing not flaws or imperfections, but the divine spark that resided within each soul. The blessed dead could peer into these waters and see themselves as the gods saw them, perfect expressions of divine creativity, each one unique, yet part of the infinite whole. Some lakes showed visions of the continuing cycles of creation, allowing the blessed to witness new worlds being born and new souls beginning their journeys toward enlightenment. As the ages of paradise flowed by, the blessed dead grew ever more radiant, their forms becoming increasingly refined until they began to merge with the very light of creation itself. Some chose to remain in the field of reeds forever, finding endless joy in its perfect beauty and eternal peace. Others eventually transcended even paradise, their souls expanding until they became one with the cosmic forces they had once worshipped, joining the eternal dance of creation that sustained all existence across time and space. In the deepest peace of this eternal realm, where even the concept of ending had no meaning, the blessed souls discovered the final truth that the ancient Egyptians had always known but never fully expressed, that death was not the opposite of life, but its completion. Not an ending, but a transformation. Not a loss, but the ultimate victory of love over time, of spirit over matter, of the eternal over the temporal. And in this understanding, paradise itself became not a destination, but a state of being, not a place, but a presence, not a reward, but a recognition of what had always been true, from the first breath drawn beneath the stars of the Nile to this moment of perfect stillness in the heart of forever.